And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Jamie Rose. How are you, Jamie?
Tony, thanks for having me. I'm really good, thanks.
Now, Jamie's quite an amazing human. So she's a certified chief happiness officer. She's the host of a bold, brave TV show called The Happiness Ninja Down Under. And she is the happiness ninja. So, Jamie, tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure, Tony. Okay, so I became a qualified positive psychology practitioner in 2015, and basically it changed my world around. Before that, I was really struggling. I had a lot of, trauma and adversity and challenges in my life. Not the most stablest of upbringings, and I was really, really struggling. I went down a really dark, spiraling hole for a very long time, and then I discovered positive psychology, and I learned that I could change the way my brain functions, and I just went for it. It was the latest thing in leadership and business, and I decided to utilize it not only for that, but to help my personal life as well.
Excellent. So what is positive psychology?
So if you think of traditional psychology, it focuses on mental illness and, basically what people are doing kind of wrong in life. But positive psychology is basically the opposite of that. And it is the way to be an optimal, thriving, flourishing human being. And you can, I utilized it to turn a lot of darkness around, but it doesn't have to be for people who are in a dark place. Like I said, this is the latest in leadership and development and the business world, and basically companies and organizations can utilize this to get the best out of their employees.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's critical for all businesses to try and get the optimum performance and outcomes out of their team. But do you find that when you talk to businesses about things like, whether it's positive psychology or whether it's the Chief Happiness Officer framework, do you find that there's some misconceptions out there?
Very much so. I think for starters, the word happiness is misunderstood. People are looking at happiness from a surface level perspective, and they're not realizing that pretty much if you have a business and you're not investing into your staff's happiness, that's going to spill over into every single aspect of your business. And I think that's kind of missed by a lot of people. For whatever reason, the business world is focused on outcomes and financial rewards. And sometimes CEOs don't really see the connection and understand that, if your staff are not happy, then they're not productive, they're not motivated. And most of the time, then they're going to spend more time pretending to look busy than actually doing their job.
Yeah, we find that, don't we? So it's interesting also, like the Chief Happiness. Like we've interviewed Belinda Jane Dolan on the show. She's actually a regular guest now. We had her also back for a panel discussion. And because I found the concept of the Chief Happiness Officer quite compelling in so many ways. And I guess once I got it into my mind, and as you know, I love simple stuff. So the simpler I can make things, the better off I'm going to be. But when, as Belinda described it, it's like a framework that it's not necessarily a person that they install as being the Chief Happiness Officer. Mm-hmm. It's about a framework that the organisation can work through. So tell me about how you use your certification as a Chief Happiness Officer and how you are working with businesses or can work with businesses in relation to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she's definitely hit the nail on the head. It is a framework. And, the premises behind having a Chief Happiness Officer is just somebody who has been trained in how to implement frameworks. And, there's many different frameworks that you can utilize within the positive psychology world. My go-to has been Perma Principles. Dr. Martin Seligman, he is the brainchild behind that model. Back in 1999, he was the Association of American Psychology. He was their leader, and he developed the Perma Foundation, which is basically the 5 underlying principles to a flourishing human organization or community. So those things, the PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So the basic premises of that is if your staff are incorporating those 5 elements or principles into both their home and their work life, they're going to be much more productive, happier, resilient, sound of mind, mentally stable, emotionally resilient than, people who just go about it without, an actual framework to fall back on.
Yeah. Does it help and support, say, conflict within workplaces? We know that most workplaces have a level of conflict, whether it's under the surface that no one wants to speak about, or whether it's visual and really ugly. Mm-hmm. Does the framework help in that respect for businesses?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so there's a thing called non-violent communication, and it's an element of positive psychology. It's related to mindfulness as well. So the more we can be emotionally intelligent and emotionally resilient, the more we can deal with conflict better and from a more separated observational perspective, rather than, confrontation is very, very hard for both parties. And it's challenging when you're dealing with confrontation to have your mind, body and spirit in alignment, so that the person that you're having the mediation or the conflict with isn't picking up on things that make the situation worse. So, for instance, if we deal with conflict and we're feeling uncomfortable, well, then even if we're trying to hide that, it's going to come out in our body language. It might come out in our tone. It may not necessarily come out in the words, but it will come out in some way. And the framework of positive psychology and mindfulness in general helps to keep all of these aspects in alignment, so that it doesn't cause extra conflict when you're trying to deal with the conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I guess one of the biggest causes of conflict is either communication or lack of communication, isn't it? And when people start reading their own story into things that are occurring around them, everyone's having a coffee break at the same time, so they must be talking about me scenario. That's, I guess, where if the development of the people and they're fully aware of their own and they're developing good, strong emotional intelligence, a lot of that conflict can start to disappear. And, one of the things that I know about conflict is within any great team, with any great performing team, there needs to be a level of conflict, because we need to challenge ourselves. We need to stretch ourselves. We need to be able to share different opinions without someone taking their bat and ball and going home, which is unfortunately what we see right around the world at the moment. If someone doesn't agree with my point of view on whatever it's going to be, you just get shouted down, and that's not conducive to any sort of long-lasting harmony or success. So I think the more that we can help people understand that, so whether it's from a positive psychology framework, whether it's a chief happiness officer framework, the conflicts are going to happen. And if we truly want to be great, we actually want to welcome people that have got a different thought and a different idea, or want to make an idea better, or, instead of just saying it's mine, and that's my thought, and if you don't think like me, I'm going to cast you aside sort of scenario, which is unfortunately what we see in the world, which is what I'm going to now talk about, because I'm going to talk about the happiness ninja, because the happiness ninja is just one of these phenomenons in my mind. And we've got this ninja that's, because another part of your inspiring story is the fact that you uprooted yourself from Australia to live in New York and take the happiness ninja with you. So the happiness ninja was a very well-known thing here in Brisbane, and especially north of Brisbane. But you've taken the same concept to the world, and the happiness ninja Down Under is a show on Bold Brave TV, but it's the focus of the Happiness Ninja is about random acts of kindness. So share a little bit about how the Happiness Ninja came into being and what you would like to see her achieve in the world or for the world.
Sure. Okay. So it's a fascinating, interesting, crazy story of I literally woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd done some marketing masterclasses. Obviously, I'd learned about positive psychology, and I just wanted to make a difference in the world and teach other people what I had just learnt, because I really felt that, it could stop a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of people who need this knowledge. And so I was working actually in prison. I had contracts with with various government organizations, and I worked in 3 prisons for a period of about 12 months. And it was during working in the prisons that I came up with this concept. I ran it by the prisoners. I wanted to see what they thought of it, because ultimately they kind of inspired the idea. When I first discovered positive psychology, I'd had a dip in my own mental health, and it was a lot of light bulbs started going off, and I was like, this is information that lower socioeconomic groups would never be able to access, and so that was essentially how the Happiness Ninja was born. I saw a lot of misery in the world. I saw this as a solution, and I wanted to educate people. I kept it as the Happiness Ninja, even though happiness, I touched on a lot of people, that's a misunderstood word. I really wanted to educate the world on what real happiness is about, not just perceived happiness and surface level materialistic, happiness that we're led to believe is the answer. Yeah.
And so tell us about the random acts of kindness. So, how random are they?
So the whole point is, to have no judgment. And to not think that somebody's worthy or they deserve a random act of kindness. So I literally dress in my ninja costume. I hit the streets and I just give out random things. It might be sitting, being on the side of a street, or it might be I just sneakily go up and pay for things, behind people in lines, or I've left things on people's doorsteps. I even once one time it was Valentine's Day, and I was having a really bad day because I had split up with my partner, and I was thinking about it a lot, and I thought, let's go and put some flowers and chocolates for Valentine's Day around Brisbane North. And I discovered a laundromat, and I thought, anyone who is in a laundromat on Valentine's Day needs some happiness. So I put a rose and some chocolates on the washing machine for them.
Wow.
So random things
that's pretty cool. That's very, very cool. And I like the fact that you talked about heading out even though you weren't feeling the best. And sometimes that's the best thing for people to, when they're feeling, because feeling down is an emotion that's natural for all of us. And people who say that they don't get a bit depressed at times are kidding themselves. They're either that or they're in an insane asylum or something. Mm-hmm. So, because everyone goes through the full range of emotions, but often one of the ways to get out of that is, if you're feeling bad, go do something for someone else that's in a worse position, or just go out and make someone's day. And there's so much research, and you're probably more aware of the research around that than what I ever will be. But, so much research that people that give get a bigger kick out of giving than what they do out of receiving. And, this is just something that, once again, so many people in the world miss. We're happy to receive what's in it for me. But often the biggest internal kicks that we get is when we give without wanting to receive back, when we can just give to make someone's day.
There's so much power behind that. And Tony, I still use that as one of my strategies to this day. If I'm having a bad day, or, I've had a lot of challenges here. I had money stolen from me, a lot of money stolen from me. And still, I will go out and do a random act of kindness. I will give to somebody who, regardless of whether I think they're in need more than me or not, I will tip people more, just because I'm trying to just show the love and spread kindness.
Yeah. And often when we show it, we receive it, but that's not what we do it for.
Exactly.
Jamie, big culture shock for you going from Brisbane to New York. So so it's been like 2 years now, is that right? Have I got the timeline
Nearly
right?
2 years.
And so let's throw COVID, cultural shock, and then we'll throw COVID in on the mix as well. So I think you've had it all.
Yeah.
So tell me, how have you juggled all of that?
Yeah, it hasn't been easy, but basically, this is what I'm trained to do. I have all of the coping skills. So, I just touched on, I got conned out of a lot of money, yet I still will give money because I'm literally just trying to counteract, what has been thrown at me. I think if we can learn to rise above and to come back to our heart center regardless, that's essentially what I've been doing. I try to make the most of the situation despite the challenges, despite that there's a lot of pressure here. It is a huge culture shock. It's a completely different environment to what I had anticipated. Because we, as Australians, we grew up watching Americans on TV, but we also have the English influence. And I didn't realize, exactly where those came from until I was here. There was certain things I didn't realize they were American or not American.
Yeah, I think some of the things that I still get confused with in America is the whole concept of the sale price, and then you get tax added at the checkout, and that just does my head in. And I ask the question of the many Americans that I know, and they say that's so everyone can know exactly how much tax they're paying and how much they can hate the government and all of this, and not just sit there and think. But it's so much easier for you to know that bottle of water is $1.99 and you don't have to get anything else out of your pocket outside of $1. I think the penny is still one of the most funniest things that I see in America. The penny, and people have just got hordes of pennies. And the other thing that I still get really confused about, and you talked about tipping, is that whole tipping service industry. And the servers certainly need the tipping to be there for them to be making any sort of decent wage. But here in Australia, hopefully the wages that those people are being paid actually covers that service component. So I'm never been quite sure as to where tipping ultimately came from, but obviously there was a restaurant owner somewhere that said, if I pay this person $1.99 an hour and then they get tips from the customers, to me it's a cost of doing business. I'm
not sure where the whole concept came from either. I do find it very challenging. But I think what I find interesting, especially about the biggest differences between the way that Australia functions and America functions, from both a country perspective, but also the way that businesses function. So America is very decentralized, but Australia is very centralized. And so this I've come to know that, this whole tipping confusion and the tax confusion, that works here in America because everything is decentralized and corporations, are less government run, less government funded, less government controlled. They have more of their own private controllership, I guess you could say. And so it works here, because of that. But if you try to take the same premises into Australia, into the centralized system that's so regulated, overly regulated and overly controlled, it's not going to work the same way.
Yeah, yeah. So, you would say, and vice versa, if you tried to take the Australian way of doing business into America, it would be incredibly challenging to implement because every state's got their own sales tax percentages, and you're absolutely right. When you've got, 51 states all doing their own little thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's quite challenging. So culturally, it must be really, really, to live in America would be quite a challenge, I'd imagine. Once you've got through that honeymoon period of, it's all new, it's all exciting, and then once it gets into, oh shit, I've got to live here now, sort of scenario.
Well, it's funny because, especially being in New York, I don't have experience of living in other parts of the country, but I know here.
Yeah.
So like the taxes in New York are different from the taxes in New Jersey, and New Jersey is literally just across the river. So, when you're talking about the functionality of businesses and, even down to the marketing and advertising component of businesses, these are factors that they have to take into consideration because people from New York will literally travel across the river to buy clothes in New Jersey so that they don't have to pay the sales tax and they get it a lot cheaper. And so people in New Jersey need to be aware of this, like business owners need to be aware of this to know how they're marketing to and who they're marketing to in the right manner. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
all fascinating.
Quite unique.
It is.
I remember one of the trips we took, we hired a car, we were staying at Brooklyn, and we drove out to Woodbury Commons. Is that the name of the place? It's an outlet centre right on the outskirts in New York State. So,
possibly, there's a lot.
And then, so we went there first, and everyone was really impressed by this particular outlet store centre, but I was less so. And we ended up coming back to a centre in New Jersey on the way back to Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. We sort of did the big loop, so to speak, and we found an outlet centre there that was just miles better and cheaper. So, yeah, I can understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Hey, Jamie, who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
So I'd have to say Martin Seligman. You can't really go past him. He's the father of positive psychology, really. I spoke about him before. He's the one who developed Perma. So I can't really go past him.
Okay. And great leaders that you've had in the past that you can look up to, inspired by, learn from?
Ooh, there's a lot of them. Belinda Jane Dolan is a big one of that. We're pretty close, her and I. I mean, I did the Chief Happiness Officer program that she created, and I've had a lot to do with her organization, and she's doing amazing things. So I really look up to and inspire, find her inspiration. And just for all our listeners, you can tell that Jamie's in New York. We've got the fire brigade and the sirens in behind her. And you know how funny, because I totally tuned that out and that was just white noise to me. So I must be a New Yorker now.
Absolutely.
I don't think I sound like
one, though. Yeah. So when you talk about leadership, so what are some of the traits that leaders need to be the best leaders that they can be today?
I really can't go past high emotional intelligence, and it's really it's something that is really hard to develop. It's not impossible to develop, but it takes work, and it takes understanding where the other person might be coming from and taking the time to understand where they're coming from. I see a lot of leaders who claim they have high emotional intelligence, and then yet they're the first ones who will, quickly dismiss an employee who is, trying to raise an issue, and they might not be realizing it. Maybe this person, is counteracting how deeply they feel about an issue. So they're coming at it very softly when actually they're really frustrated on the inside. And then because they have come at it from a soft approach, somebody who doesn't have such high emotional intelligence may not realize that, and they might, palm this person off, and then that person they're going to go from like 0 to 10 because they've been keeping this in and they've tried to approach it in a soft way because they're trying to keep their emotions in check. But then because they've done that, they've been misunderstood. So I see that happen a lot with employees and employers.
Yeah. So that high emotional intelligence. Funny you mentioned most people think that they've got good emotional intelligence because there's research, and once again, you'd be all over this more than what I am, but the research that I've seen is that, the majority of leaders believe that they've got good, strong emotional intelligence, that they've got good, strong communication and people skills. But then when they're actually surveyed the team that work for them, it's quite the reverse. Or, that they've done some some assessments in relation to that, and their scores are quite low.
Yeah.
So once again, our own self-assessment as a leader is probably one of the worst places to start, to believe that you've got some skills to be able to get that real concept of what's it like to be led by me as a leader is really, really important. And that helps determine that whole concept of emotional intelligence. I mean, the first factor of emotional intelligence is always that self-awareness. So you need to be aware, but social awareness is really, really important as well. So knowing what it's like to be led by you is a really important factor. So, and tell me about your. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it is sad that it's a skill that is under-recognized within leaders. But you shared this actually on one of your websites, Tony. I wrote an article on positive leadership and how to boost staff morale through using positive psychology tips. And I think for leaders, the number one thing, if they want to be a more effective and emotionally intelligent leader, is if they're focused on what the staff member or the team is doing negatively all the time and never praising what they're actually achieving, that's a number one downfall. And it's the most common one that I see.
So what I'll do, because you've just reminded me of that article on Towards a Better You, so I will put that link in the show notes so people can actually get that article and have a read of it. So I think that's absolutely relevant. So what's your relationship like with failure?
So I have a really good relationship with failure because I've had a lot of it. So I'm a 36-year-old woman who has not finished her bachelor's degree yet, and I dropped out of university 3 times. And I repeated the same pattern of failure 3 times before I learned to approach it in a different way. So I think for me, the key for failure is if there's no such thing as failure unless you stop trying. So the fact that I haven't finished my degree yet, but I haven't given up. I'm still, that was one of the things that I took on by coming to New York, was to study in a new country. And so I think that people need to stop focusing on failure because they take too much ownership and think that they are a failure. But that's so not true. They just haven't realized the right approach yet that suits them and their skill set. Yeah,
excellent advice. It's funny how we get into repetitive habits and we just keep doing what we're comfortable with, even though it's working or not. So many leaders do fall into that trap. And once again, Jamie, I hear so many leaders say, I'm a natural leader. And part of the concept then, and without trying to be judgmental, sometimes you get that thought, you're a naturally bad leader, and that's why you keep not succeeding. So something's got to change. When do we put this spoke in the wheel to get you going forward, or changing tack, or trying something new? And as a coach, no doubt you have the same thing happen ongoing, where you just want to help someone see what it is that others are seeing that they're unable to see. And sometimes some of those questions that we've just got to keep being really vigilant and consistent about. One day they just click, and then they finally get it. It's like you're going for the 3rd time for your degree, and then, oh my God, that's not working. Absolutely. Happens to all of us, Jamie. So, Jamie, what's the book that's had the biggest impact on you?
So I'm a big fan of Joe Dispenza. So any one of his books. At the moment, I have just started Supernatural. So he has three main books. One is, it's like Changing the Habits of You, I think. Forgive me, I might get them slightly wrong. That's what one's been the longest since I've read it. But then there's Supernatural, and then there's You Are the Placebo. So, and basically, he shows people how to reignite your own self empowerment and to learn basically the extent of what the mind is capable of, which we haven't really been taught how to embrace fully.
And once again, his name gets mentioned so often with inspirational self-awareness.
He's incredible.
In that sort of space, people tune into his videos. We actually, one of the organisations that I contract to actually had a meeting for the mentors, as I'm a mentor in that particular organisation, and they played one of Joe's videos, and it's like you can hear the penny drop as it goes around the room for some of his wisdom that suddenly starts to break through the barriers or the facade that people have. So absolutely powerful. Once again, I'll have some links in the show notes in relation to that. Jamie, for you going forward, what does it look like? What's the vision?
So basically the vision is the same as it was 6-7 years ago, and that's for the Happiness Ninja to just keep plugging away, keep chipping away, as fast or as slow as the heavens that be determine so that this will come to fruition. But just continuing to educate people on what real happiness is and try to get them to end their own suffering, because they all have that capacity to do that.
Yeah. And sometimes there's so many people that say they're not worthy of happiness, Jamie, don't they? So, and ultimately, and I know this is sometimes a really hard concept for people to take on when, they're broke or they've lost their partners, and to them their whole world is crumbling forward. There's always something, I always talk about, if you can get a glimmer of hope out of anything, you've got to turn that, or that flicker of hope, you've got to turn that flicker into a flame, because it's when we see the flicker extinguished that we start to see that there's no way out. So, and I think it's always important to try and find that flicker.
I'll just share a little bit of a story. This is a go-to that I have when I'm struggling. So 2016, I went and did Dharma Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation. And I did it in the Philippines, in a facility which would be deemed completely inhabitable, in Australia or American standards. Part of the roof was duct taped to the building. Okay. And I spent 10 days there in silence, and we didn't have proper running water or proper showers and facilities. And so whenever my life gets tough, I can't help but think back to, well, at least I have clean running water. And it's such a simple thing. And there were days where we didn't know when the water was going to just cut out. So you had to top up buckets and keep hoard water, because you just didn't know when it was going to end or for how long. And when you're faced with uncertainties like that, it really puts things into perspective. I did not have plumbing for 10 days, and there are millions of people around the world living like that. Billions, probably, actually. Billions that we just don't hear about them on the news. They're not spoken about in society. And so it's not at the forefront of our minds. But when you can really bring the small things that you take for granted and remember to be blessed, to feel blessed for having them in the moment of, trials and tribulation, it really does have an impact, because you realize how trivial the other problems are.
Yeah. Good story. Great story. And it really does bring so much gratitude for where we are, where we were born, the countries that we live, what we're allowed to do. So,
exactly.
Jamie, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
Well, there's plenty, but we'd be here for hours, Tony. I would like to just give my show a little bit of a plug because I don't do that very often. So if you'd like to check out, I interview experts on health and happiness around the world on my show. So it's live. It depends on the time around the world, but it's 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday evenings in New York, which is 8 a.m. for Brisbane, Australian Eastern Standard. Don't ask me the rest of the world, but if people would like to go to the boldbravetv.com and check that out, I would really appreciate that.
Yep, just making an impact one show at a time, aren't you, Jamie?
Exactly.
So how else can people make contact with you?
So I'm on Instagram, _happiness_ninja. Pretty much you'll find me around a lot of different platforms. If you just type the Happiness Ninja in or Happiness Ninja Down Under, it pops up a lot. I'm the only crazy girl in a ninja costume.
Jamie, it's been an absolute pleasure once again to connect with you and to have you on the Today's Leader podcast. Thank you so much for investing in Today's Leaders.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony.